Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're located. My name is Valerie Humans, and I'm the marketing coordinator over here at Turn2. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today for our webinar titled babyage.com Grows Sales with Social Q&A, and a special thanks to our guest speaker, Jack Kiefer, the CEO of BabyAge. A little background on Jack: he was part of a very small team that founded and developed Comcast at-home business, now called Xfinity, and then moved to iVillage.com and joined a team that acquired and relaunched iBaby.com. He then spent some time on Wall Street, where he was responsible for building the first fixed income trading intranet, but returned to the e-commerce industry in 1999 when he founded babyage.com, and he's been running it successfully ever since. Before we get started, I'd like to mention that if at any time during the webinar you have a question, please feel free to submit it using the GoToWebinar panel. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation, but if for some reason your question isn't answered, we'll contact you directly. With that, I'd like to hand things over to the CEO and founder of Turn2, George Eberstadt, who will be kicking things off for us today. George?
Valerie, thanks so much for the introduction. And Jack, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to everyone in our audience today. Let me tell you what we're going to do for starters. There we are. So I'm going to kick things off and just give an introduction to what social Q&A is and how it works. So you have the nuts and bolts of what the system is and what we're talking about. And I know Jack is really the person you're here to talk today, so I'm going to try and keep it as brief as I'm able. And then I think his talk about why BabyAge has chosen to use social Q&A, the value they're getting from it, and what their plans are for the future will make a lot more sense once that sort of foundation of what social Q&A really is out there. So let me plunge right in and give you an introduction. The way we talk about it, social Q&A is all about your past customers helping your current shoppers by answering product-related questions right on your product detail and category pages. So there's plenty of talk out there about what can be done with social media. That is not what we're talking about today. We are talking about social interaction right on your online storefront, and in particular on the product detail page. And here's what it looks like on BabyAge. This is a product detail page for one of their featured products, this pregnancy pillow, the Mom Cozy Comfort. And you can see they've put 3 different calls to action on the product detail page. At the top, next to the ratings and reviews button, there's a link for Ask a Question, and a count of 6 questions and 21 answers. And then down below, there's another one where it says Get Fast Advice from Parents Who Own This, Ask a Question. And finally, they've also got a tab model for their page and a link for question and answers for people who want to read the content rather than interact by asking for it. If a shopper clicks on one of those links, up comes an overlay with the Q&A utility. And at the top is an area where a shopper can ask a question. And the system explains clearly what's going to happen here. Ask customers who bought this. We'll email them your question, then email you their replies. That mechanism that we call active outreach of emailing out the question and emailing out the answers is really what makes social Q&A work. In the same way that you know from your experience with ratings and reviews that most reviews come from the email you send post-purchase that asks shoppers to submit their reviews, same thing is true for Q&A. It's that active outreach that makes it happen. Then further down the page are utilities for getting access to the content that's already there on the page. So if you flip down, here's an example on this page that's sort of fun to point out. The shopper is asked, does it come with a pillow cover, or do you have to buy it separately? Now, one of the things you see about social Q&A is this middle ground of question is really interesting. By middle ground, I mean, on one end of the spectrum, you've got, questions about the shopper's experience, past customers' experience with the product. And that you've got further down on the page here, experience with use of the pillow for somebody who's had back surgery. That really needs a social answer. The person asking the question is expecting it. And then, of course, on the other end of the spectrum, you've got questions for the staff. Is it in stock? The staff really has to answer that. But this middle category of fact questions they can be answered by the staff. And as you can see here, the staff has jumped in, the customer S for service, and said, yes, this item does come with a cover as shown in the photo. But they've also got social questions. And if you look at it, look at the sentiment that came along with those social answers. Rachel C, yes, it comes with a pillow cover, and we love, love, love this pillow. And Christina M has said, I absolutely love it. And Jamie G has said, I absolutely love it. And that sort of sentiment, goes way beyond what the staff can typically say on behalf of the store without sounding, really promotional and not credible. So, opening up even the fact-oriented questions to social answers can be really powerful. Flipping ahead further down the page, we'll come back to this later in the talk, but BabyAge has also embedded the content directly on the page so that they can get the SEO benefit from it. And we'll say more about that. Now, I want to show you what that email flow looks like. So here I've typed in a question. It happens I'm not pregnant, but I do have a bad back. So I asked a question about my real bad back and whether the pillow would help with that. I wasn't expecting a lot of answers because it's a pregnancy pillow, but I wanted to ask something that was, authentic for me. And as you can see, I put this in yesterday at 2:57. I grabbed the screenshot so you could see the timestamp. So that I submitted that question. And then this is just some of the features of the system. It offers the shopper the opportunity to ask anonymously if they like, or to submit an email address. They can authenticate their email address the old-fashioned way. I chose to use Facebook social sign-on for that. A lot of these options are configurable depending on how you want to use the system. And then having done that, the system also asks me if I want advice from my friends as well and encourages me to post my question out to Facebook or Twitter. I didn't in this particular case. And it tells me my question's been submitted. Thank you. They'll email me answers as soon as they're received. And here I can see my question right there on the page immediately. So I'm getting good positive feedback that, yes, indeed, my question has been submitted. Now, behind the scenes, of course, before this question is sent out, there's very active moderation. This is not the presentation for me to go into moderation in detail, but I just want to point this out. We've built a lot of linguistic technology into this particular product so that most of the questions submitted can be handled in an automated way, which is part of the secret to getting really fast answers. If it takes a long time to moderate a question, then there's no way you can get the answers back quickly. And in this case, you can actually see the automated system has noted a couple uses of the word bad, which might be, an alert for negative sentiment. But in this case, it's just talking about a bad back. So the question was okay and it was released. Now, once it's released, the question gets emailed to people who've really bought the product in the past. And this is what that email looks like. We grabbed a sample that was sent to Justin to help make BabyAge a friendly place to shop. We'd let shoppers ask our customers questions about the products they bought. George is looking for an answer. Since you bought this pillow in November, a couple years ago, we thought you might be able to help. And here's my question. And all Justin has to do is click answer question. Of course, if he doesn't want to get any more questions, if you look down at the bottom, we won't send you questions often, but if you'd rather not get any, click here. So there's a prominent opt-out built right in. And if Justin clicks that answer question link, he gets brought back to the site. So this is part of the benefit of the system. Your past customers are being brought back to the site, and some of them do go on and even make an impulse purchase while they're there. We've got good data on that. In fact, the conversion rate of people who come back to answer questions is typically 2 to 3 times higher than the conversion rate of normal shoppers, even though they're just coming back to answer questions. But here's the form that Justin sees when he lands on the site. He can submit his answer. And if you look at the top, he's being greeted by name. Since he's come in from an email that was unique to him through a transactional link, he's pre-authenticated. It makes it really easy for him. He just enters his answer, click submit, and the answer is accepted, and that's that. Then, once his answer is submitted, it gets sent back to the person who asked the question, in this case, me. This is not an answer from Justin. This answer came from Anti. And you can see here, I grabbed the timestamp again. This was yesterday at 3:41, 44 minutes after I submitted my question. So that's fast. That's not untypical. On average, the first answer to a good social question like that does come back in under 1 hour. So here's my question in case I need reminding, and here's the answer from An. And then the answer email provides a bunch of links to try and bring me back to the site. See all answers, reply to An, thank An, or a great big buy now button in case this was just the information I needed to complete my purchase and I hadn't already done that. So if I click on the buy now button, that brings me right back to the product detail page where I asked the question about the item I was considering. So I can go straight into the add to cart from here. Or if I want to review, if I click on that ask a question link, you can see now here's my question and here's An's answer right under it. If I thought it was a particularly good answer, I could vote it up. And you can see here, I actually did click on that thank An link, and you can see it says you thanked An for her answer. So that's what the flow looks like overall. It often, I think, seems easier than it is to pull it off. There's a lot of stuff that needs to go on behind the scenes to make this really work, to get answers that fast, and also to ensure that what's going on is safe for you as a business. Because, if you think about it, you're putting up a field on your storefront, letting total strangers type in anything they want and emailing that to your real customers. You've got to make sure that that's appropriate. And yet you don't want to slow things down because an unanswered question is a bummer. It's a bummer for the asker. It's a bummer to have on your site. So some of the things that go into making it work, automated moderation. It's a fundamentally different approach than what most of the customer reviews systems take that rely heavily on human moderation. And it just depends on, what the design goal is. If your goal, if it takes 3 days to moderate a review, so what? That's fine. And having a human read reviews, gives them an opportunity to put tags on it for later analytics. It makes sense to take a human approach. But for Q&A, speed is really of the essence. You want to get the asker an answer real quick. So a reliance on automated tools is a big part of the solution. And we've got a very strong multi-level model to handle it. It also reduces the workload as a side benefit. Another note is you want to treat that question email as a marketing email. Pretty much all the stores using our system do that, rather than require a separate opt-in. So in our particular case, the system takes a feed of your opt-out list, and those people never receive question emails. It's only sent to people who've agreed to receive marketing communications. And as you saw in the email, there's a very prominent opt-out list. Usually that opt-out rate is at low or lower than other marketing communications by a good measure. And then there's a whole slew of other things that go on behind the scenes, grouping similar items so that even long-tail products that are infrequently purchased can have a big enough pool of owners to deliver social answers. Limits to ensure that no customer receives too many questions. Once someone's received a question, they're taken out of the pool for a certain period of time. A whole bunch of tools to support the moderator, and also specialized interfaces for your staff and outside experts to answer questions in high volume. And then a bunch of front-end tools for the shopper. I didn't dwell on those, but search tools, tools for sorting, expand, collapse voting, all the sort of things that make it a rich experience for the shopper. So, when you roll all those things together, I just want to spend 1 second and show you the difference in the kinds of results that active outreach model makes. For our system, we were just being evaluated against a competing system on shoes.com, and they did a really interesting test. They had both of the Q&A systems running on every product detail page for a couple months at the same time, a real side-by-side kind of setup. And so we took the opportunity to ask questions to see, what exactly the difference was. And we picked 6 items, and we asked one question about each item through each of the 2 systems. So, of course, identical questions about each item through each of the 2 systems. So total level playing field. And then we just kept track of when the answers came back. And this is what happened. So 6 questions, per vendor here. Within 1 hour, those six questions that had been asked through the Turn2 system had already delivered 8 social answers. None from the competing system, which didn't use the active outreach model. At 8 hours, the Turn2 system had delivered 22 social answers to those 6 questions, none from the competing system. After 24 hours, still none from the competing system, but they were using it to provide staff answers. I should say this was early in the trial, and they were not yet using the Turn2 system for staff answers. So there are no Turn2 staff answers here, but it really wasn't needed because the social answer rate was so robust. 27 answers through the Turn2 system within those 24 hours. And even at the end of 4 weeks, by which time there were 29 social answers through the Turn2 system, the competing system had only delivered 4 social answers. So you can see that this is very, repeatable. We generate charts like this all the time in different comparisons. That active outreach model and all the things that go behind it really makes a huge difference. So that is the intro that I wanted to give you to sort of the nuts and bolts of social Q&A and the active outreach model. And at this point, let me turn it over to Jack to tell you a bit more about BabyAge's experience with it. Jack, over to you.
Thanks, George. So I always find it difficult to do these presentations because there's absolutely no feedback. So clearly, if I'm not doing a good job, feel free to throw something at your monitor. So some of the reasons why BabyAge has partnered with Turn2. When you look at the mom community, and you look especially as families early on in their gestation period, they're very engaged customers. And I think in general with e-commerce platforms, we do a pretty poor job of engaging people. So customer engagement and finding better ways to get our customers engaged, that's one of our key points that we're always looking for. And I can tell you that probably I get no less than 4 or 5 pitches a day from all these different software companies, which I've kind of called micro functionality. So you'll find lots of great companies that do 1 or 2 things well. But what really in the end kind of pushed us over the edge to select Turn2, and we'll get to it as we go through the rest of this presentation, is that it's just not about the myopic view of questions and answers. I think that there's a broader play here, there's a broader functionality, and I want to share some of that with you today. So dealing with the functionality that we have on our site today, a challenge, or at least that we find in the baby space, is our product pages tend to be very sterile. We've got to put kind of a combination of manufacturer copy and very what I call ethical copy. We can't go out and say, we like this stroller because it looks cool, or your friends are really going to turn their head when they see you in this. And we've kind of experimented with that in the past, trying to write maybe more press-oriented copy, but it didn't work out well because our consumers, number one, want to get product information. But then number two, after they've kind of made the decision that the car seat is the right size for their child, or the pack and play will fit, or it's got the features, the high chair has wheels on it, then they want to go down to reviews and they want to see that social interaction. What I've found with the Turn2 solution is that we're really getting the context that our site was missing. And what we call it is, for those of you who have had babies, there's all sorts of books that are published about pregnancy. But there's one in particular, it's called the Girlfriend's Guide series. And what they do is they give you it's basically full-on realistic, this is what's going to happen. And that's the part of this that I really like, is that when people ask questions, they're going to get real feedback on specific topics, as opposed to reviews where you have people that are just saying, I like the pillow, the color was great. We get a lot of comments about the delivery speed, but it's not really getting to answering specific questions with our reviews. So again, the Girlfriend's Guide factor, I think, is something where Turn2 has definitely separated themselves from our in-house developed review platform. And then the pitch that we received from Turn 2 is that there was a strong ROI opportunity. And clearly, as marketers, we know that everybody who comes out to sell us is going to tell us that you're going to see your ROI increase, you're going to see your conversion increase, it's going to be lift revenue. I mean, all the typical sales things that we've almost become immune to. But what I can tell you, and we'll show you later, is that in our implementation of the Turn 2 solution, that's actually happened. And then the last criteria before we partner with somebody, there's not enough hours in a day to do half of the work we have to do. And for us, implementation and kind of having an easy integration, that's really important. And on top of that, I don't want to add tens of thousands of additional JavaScript calls, because speed of our site is something that is a core competency of the company. So we're not going to do anything that slows the site down. And I can tell you that from first introduction of our technical teams, after a couple of questions back and forth, I think the total implementation, I mean, we put down here was in a single weekend, but the reality was it took about 4.5 hours to do the full implementation. So it hits our customer engagement. We get more humanized content or girlfriend's guide content. It did hit our ROI goals, and it was easy to install. So that kind of hit the 4 barriers that we make a service provider go through before we'll even get to the next level of conversation. Can you hit me to the next one? There we go, results. So some of these are kind of big topics. Visitor engagement with social Q&A is 2.5%. So that's between asking, answering, and reading. So if you think about that number, that's a huge number that buried in on a product page that we're getting 2.5% of all of our users are interacting with this tool. So that in and of itself was a pretty big number for me. And then askers returning to the site after they've answered an email, 16.3%. So again, going back to the re-engagement and getting people back, I sometimes think that people are immune to email, but what it seems like with this system, the reality that you're getting somebody to engage with their question or their answer is really giving them a significant incentive to come back. So when you tally this up, we're at about 1.6 questions per 1,000 viewers. So one of the kind of calculations that I do in my head, we've got a full-time writer on staff, and we pay this person $15 an hour. So kind of younger college grad to manage our blogs, does some of the moderation on our in-house review system. So at $15 an hour, I get roughly 30 sentences per day out of this person. So if you look at that, that costs me essentially $4 per sentence. So with this Q&A system, in the month of September, which is in the baby retail market, one of our lowest months of the year, we were close to 500 questions and answers. So if you were to take that 500 times $4 per sentence, that would have cost me to generate that content myself about $2,000. So that was an ROI that just kind of lit off a bell to me. And then the next thing that we did was we compared the number of reviews that BabyH generated on its own in its own system versus the total user-generated content, which is defined as questions and answers that we got through the Turn 2 system. And the Turn 2 system was 7 times higher. That was a pretty staggering number. So what it tells me is that clearly kind of the benign one-way review is not nearly as compelling as the live question and answer. So those statistics in and of themselves, I thought were really compelling. When you look at the answer rate, so answer rates on questions, 4.5%. Again, a very high level of engagement. Opt-out rate, only 0.1%. So if you look at your standard email list, your opt-out rates are probably well higher than that. Questions that received at least one social answer, 61%. And then the last one that I kind of laugh at, questions that received at least one answer, 95%. I'm sorry, so the one before was social answer, 61%. This one, at least one answer, 95%. And what kind of struck me about that is in elementary school, you were kind of always told there's no stupid question, but I can tell you after looking at this system for the last 30, 45 days is that there are really stupid questions. And, you know, in theory, that should be 100%, but there were some that we just didn't even answer. But the reality is, looking at these engagement rates, this is huge. So that's real. 4.5% in answer rate from email and a 61% social answer rate. That's a real impact. The last one is when you talk about conversion. So what we've been able to baseline here is that we've seen this astronomical increase in conversion rate. Now, clearly, we can't say that Turn 2 was impacted us by over 600%. But there's no doubt by looking at all of this anecdotal data that Turn 2 has had a material impact on that. And orders who have used social Q&A, we've had the engagement rate increase by 13.4%. So if you look at all of these factors, if you look at all of this data, the reality is that we're seeing lift revenue, we're seeing a lift in conversion, and for a company that typically is build first before buy, I know after looking at all the work that went into this application, this platform, and looking at all the reporting, that there's no way that we would have been able to replicate this. And George touched on a couple of things up front. So typically when somebody places a review on Baby Age, it might only be 3, 4, or 5 times a week that we go through and our moderator will review the reviews and post them. So speed to market, getting people answers quickly at the time that they're looking to make the purchase, that's kind of the secret sauce, I believe, in this portion of the functionality. And what I want to do now is I want to go and start talking to you a little bit about the SEO impact. So last week we took one of our pages which this is kind of a big fourth quarter item for us. It's a train table from step 2, and there's a social Q&A that is down towards the bottom of the page. And when you look at this, there were a couple of different answers that were put in there, a combination of a couple of different words. So number 1, Thomas the Train, which I can tell you from an SEO standpoint, that's a tough word to get anything involved with, even in a long tail. And then you've got grandson and plastic road. So what we did before this Q&A got answered, or it got asked on October 4th, we went and we did a search for that combination of long tail. And Baby Age wasn't in the first page. We probably weren't even in the first 5 pages. But then you look at the results 5 days later, and Baby Age was up in the top 5 results. So it's very hard to look into the black box of Google. And we had some of those words that were in some of our older reviews on that product, some of the Baby Age owned reviews. But the reality is that it appears that we're getting credit for the freshness of that combination of words. So what we do on Baby Age is as George showed you, we've got multiple ways to engage with the product. And there's a window up towards the top of the page where somebody can look at it. But what we also do is we go for the added SEO benefit of publishing the full question and answers towards the bottom of our page. So now our pages tend to be very long, but the reality is that within 5 days, those words were picked up and indexed. So I think that that's a really powerful part of this program. And then going back and looking at that, it cost me $4 per sentence, roughly $4 per sentence, and we're getting all this content generated, and we're seeing the benefits. So whether it's the benefit from SEO, whether it's the benefit from additional engagement, whether it's the benefit from ROI, there's lots of different ways where we've been able to more than amply justify the cost of this implementation and the cost of this software. So what are the things that got me excited beyond just the Q&A portion of this? So there's a new functionality that Turn2 is working on that's called Checkout Chatter. So we all as marketers are struggling with what are the next things? How do we get people more involved? So Facebook was a certain phenomenon, and I don't know about the rest of the people on the call, but us at Baby H, we haven't been able to monetize it. We've put up Facebook stores. We've tried some Facebook ads. We've tried contests. We've tried promotions. And for whatever reason, we haven't been able to get Facebook to work for us. But when you look at Pinterest, Pinterest is a lot more interesting, at least from a buyer engagement. So turning it back into Turn 2 is that there's a new functionality that they're working on developing that will allow product images to come up and will allow syndication of these reviews. So what we're really looking for is we're looking for consumers to be able to help consumers. So we as marketers believe that we know all of these correlations. But the reality is that we find all sorts of different niche consumers putting together different correlations or collections of products. So for example, a suburban Atlanta mom might have a different take on what jogging stroller that she wants versus somebody from Northern California. So the true power of what's going on here is allowing people to put together micro assortments and then almost start a small community based on, well, not really a community, but start a conversation based on these collections. So when you look at what's happening in the pipeline and when you look at what you'll be able to do with this content and potentially syndicating this content out to an affiliate, or in our case, maybe out to a collection of bloggers like a BlogHer, what it does is it gives you the power of getting social content, syndication, and imagery all put together. So in the end, they were some of the big points, the big movers that again helped me make the decision to move to Turn2. So in and of itself, with the functionality that's there today, we have a positive ROI. But going back to what I said before about all of these different companies that have micro functionality, Turn2's shown me a roadmap where I see where this application can go, and I see how much more important it can become to Baby Age. So we've kind of hit our time allotted, and I tried to step through that quickly. At this point, I think we'll open it up to questions, but we've covered the most important parts of this presentation.
Great. Thanks so much, Jack. As you mentioned, we are running out of time, but I'd like to squeeze in one question that we received. And Jack, the question is for you. You mentioned that you were able to integrate the Q&A system in just a weekend. Was that a full integration or just limited for testing purposes?
So we did a full integration in 4 hours, and that put the full Q&A application in. We went back probably about a month later, and we added the Q&A to publish to our page at the bottom of the page. So the only way in the first 4 hours that you could see the Q&A was actually through the pop-up box. But 4 hours from start to finish, entire implementation.
Great. Well, I think that concludes our webinar for today as we are out of time. Thank you all again for joining us, and please don't hesitate to contact us with any additional questions you may have. We can be reached at contact@turn2.com. Again, thank you, and thanks again, Jack. Have a nice day.